Thank you, everyone, and it is actually a hard act to follow, Nina, but I'll try. So I've been in Australia actually close to 100 days, and I would say that it has been a very interesting time, and I couldn't imagine being at a better place in this time and, frankly, in the history of this industry. So what I'd like to do today is really, I'm going to focus a little bit on what AEMO is going to be doing, and really the theme of this is that, for me, is that we really are at an unprecedented rate of change in this industry, and that's across the world. So I woke up this morning, and like many of you, I'm sure no one here admits it, the first thing you do is you check your email and you check the mail, and there's a couple of trade rags I always look at coming out of the U.S., and my counterpart at PJM, which operates the grid in the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States, was at a conference yesterday talking about how PJM was going to manage through this rate of change in the energy markets and the fact that the markets need to change because they're no longer fit for purpose for what changes are going on in the industry. So, I'm always sort of reminded of this fact that as much as we understand this is a primary issue for us, frankly, it's a primary issue everywhere. It's a primary across the United States, across Canada, across Europe. People are looking at this issue and saying, look, when I think about it, the markets were started about 20 years ago. Across the world, they were started at a time where the prominent and the predominant mechanism to supply energy was large-scale generation, coal, gas, U.S. nuclear, hydro. That's simply not true anymore. And so it shouldn't surprise any of us that we ought to be thinking about these markets moving forward and how we operate the grid moving forward in a very different way. And, and if you sort of wonder about that change, I asked my staff to pull up some facts on really what's happening in Australia. And just going from 2008 to 2017, just to kind of keep in mind some sort of basic facts that I always try to think, okay, really, we keep saying is it changing? Is it really changing? So we had, in 2008, and I won't review all these, but 2,700 megawatts, roughly, 27.8 of coal. We're now at 27,000. We're now down to 23,000. And gas, we were at 7,000 megawatts. We're now up to 10,000. But the other point is that the amount of LNG has doubled the domestic gas use. So we spend more gas on LNG production than we do on domestic use. On wind, 2008, we had 1,100 megawatts. We're now 4,000. And AEMO is predicting by 2020, we're going to be up to 10,000 megawatts of wind. In solar, we were at 0. We're now at 265. And we're predicting 11,000 over the next several years. And if you look at our queue for connections, you would actually see that. Also on small wind and also small solar, the Clean Energy Regulator said in 2008 we're at 14,000 installations of solar. In 2017, we're at 1.6 million. And in terms of batteries, in 2015, we had 500 batteries that people looked at. 2016, 6,700, and it's growing. So without question, you can't take a look at the system and say, oh, we can operate it the same way. So we at AEMO, we agree with AusNet that the Finkel review identifies a number of the changes that we need to make, and we really need to get on with it. So what I'd like to do is sort of talk about how we're processing this and thinking through the best way to go about it. So one of the areas that the Finkel review identifies is better national planning. So, I always talk about that the energy system is really a system of systems. And that came out of a conversation I had with Boeing in the heyday of the development of smart grid in the United States. Everybody was getting into smart grid, and I started working with Boeing. They said, well, we run airplanes. Airplanes are systems. The electric system's a system. I said, yeah, but the difference between your system and our system is our system doesn't land. And so we have to figure out how to fix it as we go. But really the electric system, and what we're talking about when we talk about planning, it's really not one system. It's really actually 6 systems that we need to be thinking about because they're interconnected systems. So there's the electric transmission. I was talking to Stu Jeffries from Exxon last week and said, and also the gas system. We're seeing an increasing integration of gas and electric. So we actually have to think about that. It's distribution system. When we started developing integrated planning in this industry in the 1990s, 1980s, we did it at the utility level. We always assumed that demand was largely inelastic. Distribution systems are going to be one way. And you just needed to deliver to the substation and then the distribution system would sort of manage itself. Well, that's not true anymore. So when we're talking about planning of networks, we've got to think about what's happening at the distribution level. But it really doesn't end there. Because we also have to think about the data systems. When people talk about the Internet of Things, we have to think about how that's evolving. We certainly need to think about building systems as buildings become smarter and how they're going to be working. And then we need to think about the financial systems, because frankly, these systems have to be investable. And we need to understand how the financial community looks at things too. So all of these systems actually have to work together. And so when we're thinking about developing plans for the national energy market, what's going to be very important, one is there's a high degree of coordination, certainly with the network businesses, a great deal of understanding of what's happening in technology and industry, because what you want to do is you want to think about your planning for the future. And so entities like ABB, GE, Siemens, also the Tesla, all the new technologists, they're going to be very important because we're going to need to understand what they're thinking about. And then the other piece when we think about planning is that you want to end up, in my view, is a view of how these industries are going to involve in the NEM, how do we create stability, and how do we basically advise on what I would call the no regrets types of investments to create a national network. What are these interconnections? What should we be investing in today so that if there's 10,000 megawatts of wind, 20,000 megawatts of wind, 5,000 megawatts of wind, this amount of gas, we have the confidence that we have the flexibility to be able to handle all of that, and we're driving value to consumers. So in that process, it begins with both an understanding of need, high degree of collaboration, an informed process, and an outcome where, in my vision, we have the networks, along with AEMO, putting together a plan that is truly in scale where we can understand, everyone can understand where we're going. And these networks are not just, again, transmission, they include gas, they include distribution, and that the financial community and the technology community can say, yes, that makes a lot of sense. And so that's one piece I think will be very helpful. The second, and you think about 3 things we have to do: planning, operations, markets is operations. Without question, the operations of these markets are very different than they were historically. And so for AEMO, our chief role is to operate a secure system. Well, that's very different today when we have distributed energy resources, we have a lot more renewables, we have the incumbency of batteries, and we have the ability of the system to react much more quickly. So one of the things that we're looking at AEMO is really focused on what makes a secure system, and recognizing that in some instances, it's not about markets. It's just about standards. So the things that are identified in the Finkel report about system strength, inertia, frequency, we're living real time. We certainly saw it last year in the system black. But what's most important is to recognize that some of these areas of standards are very localized, and that we need to get smart about the fact that the markets can't solve everything, but we want to maintain a secure system. So trying to understand those differences and really operating in a millisecond framework is going to be something that we need to experience. To do that, I think it's very important that we do demonstrations. So I did welcome the announcements of batteries, because it's important that we all get experience on how these systems work. And the other demonstrations that we're working on with a lot of the network companies around how do we integrate distributed energy resources better, how do we create these vertical systems where demand is much more elastic, are going to be important because we want to get them to scale. But again, because we're flying that airplane that doesn't land, It's so critical that we get experiences on small scale before we take it to large scale, because we all want to know how it works, and we want to do it in the most efficient way. So working on these issues, learning how to innovate, and then innovating with the market are going to be important, but doing it in a way that's safe and secure for the system. The last piece are markets, and you know, I always feel like I'm in an Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know if these, but I was a regulator, and one of the things we cared about was consumers. That was sort of the primary part. But I haven't changed my feeling about that. The whole reason we have markets is to drive value to consumers. The whole reason we went to markets is that we decided that there are aspects of this industry that were no longer a regulated monopoly, and we can provide a more efficient outcome through competition. That shouldn't change. That should continue to be the value, but should be focused on the consumer. And I think if we were designing the markets today with the amount of elasticity, we would be thinking about it from the consumer out as opposed to the generator in. But in terms of that, though, and thinking about the markets going forward, I think it is important to go back to the fundamentals of what's changing. So when we first developed the markets in the 1990s here and in the US and in Europe, the generators had different fuel types, but they were largely homogeneous products in the sense that they all provided capacity, they were dispatchable, they all provided energy, and they all provided system security. So if you gave them one price signal, it all became a question of, when we talk about operating the market in a way that's both economic and secure, what's the next resource you should use to get to the next increment of marginal cost? Well, that's not true anymore. We have resources that have zero marginal costs, and they provide energy. We have resources that provide system strength. We have an inertia resources that don't provide those resources, those kind of capabilities. We need new investment. So to think about that, it means that we have and we have resources on both sides of the grid, of the meter. So to think about that, it's a very heterogeneous system, which means that when what we really want is to send out accurate price signals. We want the system to be investable. But we need to make sure we're providing accurate value for the resources that we're getting, which means that we have to start rethinking how the market looks at things. So things like are in discussion already, the 5-minute market, things like demand response markets, things like how do you get investment in, what kind of price signal do you need for fixed investment, and things like paying for system and security. And really what I think about it is unbundling this homogeneous price into price signals that make sense given the nature of the resources we have is exactly really what is identified in the Finkel report as something that needs to be discussed, and really something that's been in discussion with the AMC, the AER, and the AMO. So when the market bodies got together and looked at this and said, yeah, we absolutely think these are the right areas. What we need to do is start thinking about the priorities and how do we get it done. So I think that moving forward for us in Australia, but this same issue is happening in the US, is understanding we've got to unpack the energy price. I think about telecommunications. You used to just pay for dial tone. That's all you got. Right? Well, we don't just get dial tone anymore. We get a lot of other resources. So when you buy communication, you have different price signals that you expect to pay for, and you pay for it in different ways. That's what we have to think about as energy, is how we're going to unpack that energy price to send the right price signals to get the right investments so we have the right kind of value back to consumers. And then we also have to think about how are we going to get investments in. So understanding what kind of signals are going to be critical. So what we think about in the markets, and we've discussed, in terms of now, how do we go from ideation to actuality, there's several things that I think I find I'm very optimistic about. One is, one of the nice things about being a newcomer is you get to talk to a lot of people. And I would say 100% of the folks that I have spoken to across the industry, across the sectors, all say the same thing, which is what Nina just said. We got to get on with it. There's no question there's a path forward, and we need to take it, and we need to move, and we need to move quickly. And so now we have this coalition of the willing, and then really the challenge is how do we harness that into actual plans and implementation in a short period of time, because we want to take advantage of this. And I think in addition to, I would say, two things that I've heard since I've been in Australia. The first is, how are you finding Australia? Which I would say to everyone here, great, I love it. And secondly is, the second piece is that we have got to make these changes, and we can't, and we don't want to waste this crisis, and I would agree with that too. So we want to move this stuff forward. The other thing that we're going to be doing then is, in addition to working then with the participants and making sure that we come up with this plan that makes sense, is we've already begun working with the AEMC and the AER. I can tell you, and I won't speak for my colleagues, but Paula is here, so she can tell you she disagrees afterwards. I think that Paula, John, and I agree on one thing, and that is we want to get on with it. We're excited for the COAG meeting. We're looking forward to working together. We've already started putting our staffs together. We just want to get this done. And the third piece is really working with COAG. And I think our job, when I say our here, it's not just AEMO, it's AEMO and the industry, and it's the market bodies, is for those of us who are experts, who really care about these markets, really want to invest in them, we need to come up with an actionable plan with details, bring them back to the COAG so they have the confidence that what we're coming out with is something that people will invest in and stand up for, and it's all around the same principle, which is driving value to consumers. So I am totally bullish on what we're doing. I think that we can get it done, and in the last piece, and the thing that sort of strikes me near and dear to what I care about, since I've been in this industry for 30 years and I love it, is that, we're fortunate in the OECD countries because while we worry about energy prices, and that is a critical issue here, we have access to energy. Around the world, there are a lot of people, millions, billions of people who still don't have access. If we solve these issues in Australia, we figure out how to use distributed resources better, we figure out how to integrate these resources better, we're not just solving the issues here, we're solving them for the rest of the world, because I think the system we have here is probably the closest system that we're going to see get developed in Africa and Asia and elsewhere. And I think that our ability to grapple and as a continent work together and get this done is probably the easiest path forward to get these issues solved. And I'll say that as an American, where the ability to get things done are much more challenging because it's bigger, more fragmented, and as anyone here knows, highly politicized. But I think the goal here and the crisis gives us an opportunity, and at AEMO I can tell you we're excited, a bit exhausted, but we're excited and we're looking forward to all of you, to work with all of you to get this all accomplished. So thank you.